students, today we will be continuing on with our medium series, and we are going to focus on the medium of painting. I'm a painter myself, been painting for a long time, all different styles, all different mediums, all different sizes. Painting has many different forms. There's oil painting, acrylic painting, tempera painting, there's watercolor painting, there's ink painting. So all the different forms of painting have their own unique qualities, and we are going to study some of the great painters of all time and the techniques that they used, including Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. Painting is a medium that everyone has had an experience with to some degree. Painting is often what most people think of when they think of the word art, and everyone has an experience with painting to some degree, whether they have a painting in their house, or they've made paintings when they were younger, or maybe they paint for leisure or relaxation. But painting is a very complex medium that has evolved quite a bit over the years, and we are going to do our best to unpack it in this lecture. So please enjoy. Thank you. Most of us think of painting when we think of the term art, and it expands millennium from prehistory to contemporary graffiti. Paint in its most basic form is composed of pigment and a liquid binder that holds that pigment together and allows it to stick. Pigments are extracted from minerals, soils, vegetable matter, and animal byproducts. Here's all different pigments that we see throughout time. There was a pigment made from mummies, crushed up mummies. There's been pigments made from bones. There's been pigments made from yak urine. And lapis lazuli, ultramarine blue, is one of the most valuable pigments, or was traditionally one of the most expensive and valuable pigments. Binders are traditionally beeswax, egg yolk, vegetable oils, and gums, water, and polymers in contemporary art. You also use mediums and thinners. If it's watercolor or acrylic, you use water to thin. And if it is oil paint, you would use linseed oil or turpentine as a medium and as a thinner, a solvent, dissolve out the binder. There are many different kinds of brushes you can use. Hog's hair brushes are popular because they are natural brushes. There's also sable brushes made from the sable fox. And there's a whole array of synthetic brushes made now too, from synthetic fibers. These are the basic parts of a brush. You have the toe, the bristles, the belly, you have the heel, the ferrule, and the handle. And then different kinds of brushes as far as what the point would be. Commonly used brushes are the round for sketching and thin paint application for drawing on your outline. Can be rolled in the hand for special effects. You have the filbert, that's for applying color. Short bristles for more controlled and soft edges. You have the flat, that's long fluid strokes and for sharp edges. The bright, controlled detailing and applying areas of color. And then the fanned, for blending slow, drying paint and softening edges. Here's some sable brushes. Sable is extinct in a lot of parts of the world and illegal to trade in other parts of the world. So many sable brushes are now synthetically made. Also, you can use a palette knife. That's a tool that can be used by a painter for mixing and applying paint. I use a palette knife mostly for mixing paint, but it can be an effective way to apply paint, which we'll see later on in a form called impasto. Many discoveries of cave paintings have been made in southern Sulawesi in Indonesia, made of a pigment solution that was applied blowing through a small tube. Paintings are mostly of animals in this cave location with some human imagery. They're about 45,000 years ago, and they were used a red iron oxide pigment. And you can tell there's some detail, probably observed from life. As you can see, the bristles of the pig are depicted. This is the Fayum Oasis portraits. That's where they were found in Egypt. They were made in 100 CE, so it was actually Egypt under Roman rule. And this is an encaustic painting. So to use encaustic, an artist must mix pigments with hot wax and then apply the mixture quickly. You can use brushes, palette knives, or rags, or can simply pour it. A stiff back support is necessary, and this was used by the Greeks and Romans. So this would have been painted on a sarcophagus. It is a funerary adornment. Encaustic is semi-transparent and very stiff. Here's some more funerary portraits. They have amazing naturalistic depictions, and we don't know what the people really looked like, but they must have looked pretty accurate because these are well-painted, realistic portraits. Encaustic is also used in contemporary art, and it can often be used as a change-up from the oil and acrylic that you see. Sarah Mast is a professor at Montana State University who does encaustic and is inspired by the cosmos, mathematical equations. This is one of a black hole. It has a very waxy and distinct finish when you see it. Jasper Johns' flag is an American flag painted with an encaustic finish on top of it. The texture is very unique. Fresco. This is another type of technique. This is a painting from Crete in Greece, and it's made from 1400 BCE. This painting is a technique in which the artist paints a mixture of pigment and water onto freshly applied plaster. This is one of the earliest examples that we have. nosos that we would have had no insight into whatsoever if we didn't have this plaster fresco fragment that's left behind. There's two kinds of fresco, bueno fresco and fresco secco. Fresco, again, is applied to wet plaster, so it's pigment applied to wet plaster. This is a fresco from Pompeii. As you know, Pompeii was buried in 79 AD from a volcano eruption, completely covered the city. And because of that, we have many areas of Pompeii are preserved when they've been excavated, preserved much better than areas that were not encased by a volcano, allowing them to stop the decaying process, basically freeze them in time. Bueno fresco also means good fresco. You must prepare the wall surface by overlaying undercoats of rough plaster containing sand, gravel, cement, and lime. Artist adds a further layer of plaster and lets it dry for a few days, and then transfers the cartoon, which is the underlying drawing we talked about last lecture, plaster. Then one last finishing layer of plaster that they can paint into. And it only is available for a couple of hours before it sets. This is another fresco from Pompeii. Frescoes in Pompeii were used in homes to show good taste, impress, show that you were cultured, show that you were rich. Often the way that paintings, expensive paintings, are used in contemporary society as trophies. And you can see perspective is actually used in this. Remember, perspective really comes into its own during the Renaissance, which is over 1,000 years later. But Renaissance means revival. So Renaissance was a revival of the forgotten techniques of the ancient Romans and Greeks. So Pompeii, one of these frescoes, actually preserves that there was knowledge of the perspective used way back. Michelangelo Buonarroti, this is the Libyan Sibyl. We looked at a preparatory drawing of this last week. So this was made in the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was commissioned to do that, and he painted it over 4 years. It's incredibly complex and very interesting to see if you ever get a chance to travel to the Vatican in Rome. Michelangelo used the bueno fresco method to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He used this strategic approach in order to disguise the seams between separate days' work. So remember, in the bueno fresco, you only have a couple of hours to paint it. If you don't paint it the way that you want, you have to chip away the entire plastered area and redo it the next day with a new fresh layer. So it's very difficult to correct any mistakes. Since you only have a couple hours to do it, he would only paint a little bit at a time. This one, you can barely see it, but there's a crease around the leg, and that would have been where he would have painted for the day. So he would have put the wet plaster just in this area, painted that in, let that dry, and then moved on to painting a next area. So anywhere where there would be a crease, he could paint that for a day. Here's some more pictures of the Sistine Chapel. In the very middle of the Sistine Chapel is the famous God and Adam picture. Here it is, the Last Judgment over here. Another famous fresco painting is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. It is in Milan, Italy. This piece is made from tempera and oil paint on a dry wall. So he did Da Vinci did the fresco secco, where he painted onto dry plaster, which is not as durable over time. The humidity and temperature fluctuations in this church in Milan caused this painting to quickly flake and fade away. And they actually spent 21 years repairing it and restoring it up to 1991. So an experimental technique didn't quite work for this one, but it is a masterpiece and one of the most famous paintings in the world. Walter O'Neill uses fresco as well. He uses a more painterly and abstract style in the buona fresco process. He uses this to enhance his energetic and gestural strokes, and he paints it on wire mesh and wood. So even though this is derived from Renaissance fresco painting techniques, he uses it for a contemporary style. Next, we'll talk about tempera, which is egg yolk is used as a binder with pigment. Next, we'll talk about tempera. In tempera, egg is the binding agent. So it's egg yolk and pigment. If you've ever cooked eggs and tried to scrape them off a pan, you know how difficult it is to scrape off the egg yolk. It's usually applied with a brush and it dries almost immediately. It has a transparent, soft glow and is mixed fresh every time you use it. Every session, it's mixed fresh. The earliest examples of tempera are found in Egyptian tombs. This is a painting of the Madonna and Child by Giotto in 1310. So this one is tempera painting the figures and then gold leaf used around it, which is a style you often see in Byzantine portraits pre-Renaissance. This is Duccio, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. This work is one of a series of images depicting the life of Christ. You can see them from the front or the back. It's a freestanding altarpiece that's in Siena, Italy, and it has all the key moments of Christ's life. There's brilliant detail, short, thin brush strokes, and it shows Duccio's mastery of this challenging medium. Since it dries so fast, you have to be precise with the way you apply it. But if it is done right, you get this great luminous effect. A contemporary artist that uses this to mastery is Andrew Wyeth. He is now passed, but this was his most famous painting called Christina's World. Wyeth uses a sense of realism and high detail in this work. He depicted his disabled neighbor and expresses her extraordinary conquest of life, as he put it. High detail creates a sense of mystery to stimulate the viewer's imagination. Andrew Wyeth's brother and father both were oil painters of renown, so he switched to tempera in order to have himself stand out in juxtaposition with them. And there will be a video in the module to watch on Christina's World. It's one of the most famous American paintings. Here's some other paintings by Andrew Wyeth. He has a mastery of this unique method, and very few contemporary artists still use egg tempera. Next, we will talk about oil paint. Artists used oil paint during the Middle Ages, but have regularly used it only since the 15th century. Oil paint is linseed oil and pigment. Linseed oil is the binder. It's a byproduct of flaxseed. It's flexible, it's slow drying, and can be blended days after application, allowing for smooth effects and fine detail. Depending on the environment you're in, it can take up to a week for an oil painting to dry, allowing you to fix it over and over. So the flexibility of oil painting is one of its major advantages. The other one is that it can be layered and create a very luminous, glowing technique that you do not see in other mediums. This is Johannes Vermeer, Woman Holding a Balance from 1664. And this is a great example of that luminosity. You get a bright, beautiful white light that emanates from her and from here. And when this was first painted, this would have been an amazing blue color. It's somewhat faded over the last 400 years, but that would have been one of the most expensive pigments, the lapis lazuli. Jan van Eyck was credited as the inventor of oil paint by a guy named Vasari. He was not actually the inventor, but was an exceptional practitioner of it. He masterfully used thin layers of color called glazes. That's when you stack layers of paint on top of each other, and then light reflects between the glazes to create this luminosity. An example of that would be this beautiful robe that Mary is wearing here, Madonna of the Chancellor Roland. We have an angel here bringing a crown. The Grand Odalisque, which we looked at last week, this one is in grisaille, which means black and white. One strategy for painting oil is to paint the entire painting in black and white first, so you know which areas are light, which areas are dark, and everything's laid out. And then you can slowly add colors to create this realism and this glow and luminosity. Another version of it is verdocchio, which is the same type of thing, but you paint it all in greens. See how this is built up in a greenish color, and then you add the flesh tones on top of the green. John Rand in the late 19th century created the collapsible tube. So that's when we see a tube of paint actually made where you can carry it around. Before that, you would have just had the raw pigment, the powdered pigment, and you would have poured your linseed oil into the pigment and crushed it up to make your paint. So it was harder to transport. You needed a studio to work it. Van Gogh and the Impressionists used the collapsible tube at the end of the 19th century, and that allows them to take paint out into the open, to paint in plein air with big palettes, to paint fast. You can cap your paints when you're done so they don't dry out. So this is an incredible revolution for paint that gives us all kinds of new painting, and really is what we think of with oil paint now. You don't even see anyone ever mixing the old style. This is Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait with bandaged ear. Van Gogh, of course, sliced off a piece of his ear, and he painted a couple of self-portraits with bandages. Oil paint can be used in a technique called impasto as well. Impasto is when paint is thickly applied and built up. It gives the work a three-dimensional appearance. So Joan Brown in this painting uses impasto to build up these thick layers. It sort of bridges this area between painting and sculpture, and we'll see some other great examples of that. Gabriella Munter also did some impasto work, and you can paint impasto with a palette knife as well. So you just scrape the palette knife, you scrape the paint up with the palette knife, and then smush it onto the canvas to get these thick textured areas. This is how Gabriella Munter painted with a palette knife. Next, let's talk about ink painting. Ink painting is commonly used on papers. The fibers were able to hold the pigment. Painting inks are slightly different from drawing inks because they have a binder, usually gum arabic, rather than simply being suspended in water. Gaozi, this is a Chinese work from 1072 in ink painting. This is a painting from the literati. That's a Chinese painting tradition that grew out of poetry. So a combination of calligraphy and painting that evolved into its own unique style of art, a lot of times landscape. And this is what Gaozi called floating perspective, the angle of totality. He would paint the same scene from different vantage points so that you can get this view of totality. That's what the angle of totality means. Watercolor. Watercolor is pigment suspended in water with a sticky binder, usually gum arabic, usually painted on paper. Watercolor is transparent. Any area in a watercolor is under unpainted paper. Watercolor is transparent. Therefore, any area that you want to leave white, you just have to leave unpainted. So the white of the paper shows through. An additive, often chalk, is added to watercolor to turn it into gouache. Gouache, unlike watercolor, is more opaque. So watercolor is transparent. You can see through it. Whereas gouache is thicker and more chalky, can't really see through it. This is Albach Dürer's painting A Young Hare from 1502. Dürer painted in the studio, and this reflects a direct observation of the natural subject. There's a sense of the creature's soft striped fur. It's a combination of watercolor and gouache. The gouache would have been used for the highlighting in the hair here, the little white parts. Because you can't make white in watercolor, it's very hard to make mistakes. John Singer Sargent used watercolor to paint in plein air, so that means out in the open. Watercolor is much easier to transport. It's not toxic. It's smaller. It's less of a commitment. It's on paper instead of canvas. Therefore, it's easier to bring outside with you. You can bring it outside. You can use it quick. You can clean it up quickly. It dries quickly. The only problem with it is that you can't make mistakes. John Singer Sargent would have painted this pretty fast, maybe in an hour or so. He's able to manipulate it and was a true master of painting these in plein air landscapes in watercolor. Sonia Delaunay was the first woman to have her work shown at the Louvre in her lifetime. A simultaneous artist book, her watercolor illustrations are set next to the poetry of Blaise Cendrars. This is a book that opens up to the height of the Eiffel Tower, but it folds down like a road map, and it contains poetry and then illustrations to go with the poetry. Acrylic. Acrylic is pigment suspended in an acrylic polymer resin. It has been in use since about the 1950s. Andy Warhol's one of the first ones to champion it. It dries quickly and can be cleaned from surfaces with water. It uses acrylic paint. Julie Mertu uses acrylic paint because it dries quickly, and that way she can stack layers on top of each other, alternating between mediums. So she'll often do a layer of acrylic followed by some drawing or ink and then more acrylic on top. It allows her to integrate other medias into the acrylic painting. So that quick drying is one of the biggest advantages of acrylic paint, but it has sort of a plasticky feel to it. David Hockney uses acrylic paint in some of his pool paintings. Remember, we looked at the pool painting on the first lecture. Robert Motherwell also uses acrylic paint for abstract paintings. He did a series of abstractions from a Spanish Civil War. Ralph M. Larman in Colopolis uses acrylic paint. He chose acrylic because of the plastic quality that reflects the manufacturing process. So he wanted to emphasize the relationship between economic progress and ecological damage. Glazing can also be used in acrylic if you thin the paint enough, and it can get the same kind of luminosity. But in this painting, the coal factories and the paint wants to draw a connection between that plasticity and artificiality of the acrylic paint and the process of refining materials using coal as power plants. Judy F. Baca in this painting uses acrylic. The idea of collaborating on a painted mural with an entire neighborhood has become an important tool for urban renewal, and Judy F. Baca used this one as a public mural where the neighborhood was able to get involved. That way, there's a sense of community that happens. There's an overall consensus on what is displayed, painted for an interior wall in the Dallas Latino Cultural Center. It uses influences from surrounding community and local traditions. Baca often employs members of the local area to help her create her paintings. Portal artwork. This is Diego Rivera, Man Controller of the Universe, or Man in the Time Machine. Diego Rivera painted in Mexico during the 30s and 40s and 50s, and he painted a lot of murals that reflected social justice and the labor movements. They were under the oppression of a dictator in Mexico at that time, and often he would paint murals as a protest against big corporation, as a protest against oppressive regimes. He wanted his murals to represent the people and the workers and the Communist Party as well. He also painted a very detailed and intricate mural in Detroit at the Art Museum chronicling the workers of the Ford factories. Robert Rauschenberg, he likes to blend the traditional boundaries of art. Mixed media collage are popular ways of creating intriguing art. In this one, it's a bed, there's a quilt, there's painting on top of that. So it's sculpture, it's painting, it's all different ways that artists can express themselves, different ways beyond oil paint, acrylic, on a flat surface. Multimedia brings together all these different types of medium. Graffiti artists use stencils as a quick way of transferring designs to surfaces. Spray paint is the favorite of tag and graffiti artists. Today's spray paint techniques closely resemble those of ancient artists. Graffiti is another sort of communal effort. Banksy does graffiti that taunts the authorities who seek to curb his street activities. He captures the irony of the moment by using colored pink as a tool of criminal vandalism. So here we have a boring sign, but then he writes it over it in pink to energize it, puts a little boy there. He does all kinds of fun stunts. This is another one of Banksy's where one of the Olympic rings is being stolen. Does very ironic things. Here's the military police soldier being frisked by the little girl. Banksy also did a stunt where he sold his works on the street in New York for $60 a piece. 8 people were able to snatch up an original piece before it was realized that this was the real Banksy. He also did this girl with a balloon, which was an auction piece. And as soon as it was sold, it began shredding itself. Although the piece broke halfway through, the shredder broke halfway through, and the piece was only partially destroyed. Now is worth more. And another graffiti artist is Blue Blue. I have a video on how his artwork is created. He has concealed his identity since 1999, and he likes to do these crazy, silly characters. He uses big paint rollers to blot out areas and then will draw these figures on top of them. Starting with cave paintings where they would blow pigment through a little tube onto the wall and ending with graffiti brings us back full circle. The graffiti artists also use walls, enamel pigment sprayed through an aerosol can, another way to spray art through a tube onto the wall, and brings us back to that primal urge to just paint on surfaces and paint on walls. So painting, probably my favorite medium. Thank you for watching the painting lecture, and I hope you like this as much as I did.